a doctorate in organizational leadership studies from Northeastern University. So Jason is also on the board of trustees for the Maine School of Science and Math, and is a member of the Maine STEM Council, STEM Collaborative, and serves on the advisory committee for the Code.org regional partners. So Jason, we're excited to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the introduction, Joan. I'm excited to be here. I was able to sit in last month on the last speaker, which was great. It gave me a sense of the club and the work that you're doing and the conversations that you're having. So happy to be here for a little bit around lunchtime. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got some slides with some information that I'll reference throughout. And just give me just a minute and we'll make sure all this works well. And then we'll get started. Can everybody see slides by chance? Getting some head nods. Okay, good. You know, that's the first challenge of any virtual presentation, is making sure that broadband and the slides work well. So again, happy to be here. As Joan mentioned, I'm Jason Judd, Executive Director of Educate Maine. And really what I'm going to do today for the next little while is to talk about the connection between education and economic development or economic prosperity. Obviously, you heard from my bio that I've got quite a bit of experience in Maine educational institutions and a variety of roles. And then over the last couple of years, I've really looked at the intersection of education and economic development and how the two connect specifically. So what my goal today is to talk really briefly about Educate Maine, just so you get a sense of what we do, but spend the majority of the time talking about a coalition that we're involved in called Maine Spark, and then have plenty of time for questions and discussion toward the end of the presentation. So my hope today is that throughout the conversation, you'll think about how this work connects to your club and some of the priorities that you've discussed with your club, and also the role that you have outside of your club as a business owner, nonprofit leader, you know, school leader, you know, whatever your role might be, because both the work we do at Educate Maine as well as the work we do with Maine Spark is really inclusive. Everybody's invited to the table, and we would love to have more support and more individuals from across the 16 counties supporting the work in different ways. So let me talk briefly about Educate Maine, and you heard that we're a business-led education nonprofit. So our board is made up of 2/3 business leaders and 1/3 educational leaders, and really we're a group of people that care about how the business community and the education community can work together to solve community challenges. We're focused on increasing career readiness for young people and adults, and making sure that everybody can flourish in our Maine educational system, and then get connected to a high quality job on the other end. So we're not about education for education's sake. We're not about everybody goes to college. Instead, we're about, we believe that education is a part of the work you have to do in the schooling you have to do after high school, but that needs to align with a high quality job here in Maine. And that looks different for everybody depending on your interest, your industry in general. So that's a little bit about what we do. Let me dive quickly about the programs so that when you hear a little bit about our programs across the state, you'll connect those programs with Educate Maine as an organization. So these are our 4 principal programs that we operate at Educate Maine. You might have heard, especially this fall, about the Maine Teacher of the Year program. We recently announced the Maine State Teacher of the Year for 2020 this fall. And that's a program that we run with the Maine Department of Education. And really it's about recognizing teachers from all 16 counties and having the business community support those educational leaders and those teacher leaders so that they can thrive with their students in the classroom. So we run the Maine Teacher of the Year program, and we'll be accepting nominations for great teachers starting in January. So a little bit of a plug, if you have great teachers in your communities, feel free to nominate them starting at the first of the year for that particular program. We also run Education Leaders Experience, which is a program that we do with Unum, a business in Southern Maine. And that program is all about bringing educational leaders to different parts of Maine to learn about emerging industries, to kind of widen their view on how there's a variety of business opportunities across the state and a variety of industries for young people to transition into, including everything from forestry to manufacturing to aquaculture, et cetera. So it's a year-long program where we bring educational leaders right into communities and stop at different businesses to hear about economic development in different regions of the state specifically. And our two other programs, Project Login is about building the tech workforce. We believe that every student in Maine should have some sort of foundation in technology, regardless of what they're interested in. So we have a program that helps schools develop tech programs and get connected with employers looking for tech skills with their employees. And then our fourth program we run for Focus Maine, which is really about convincing the interns that come to Maine every summer, that both are Maine residents and outside of Maine. They spend typically 3 months interning in the summer months. Our program is about providing them professional development, social and recreational experiences, so that those interns can understand what it might be like to begin their careers in the state. As many of you know, we oftentimes lose young people after they graduate from college and they move on to other states. And that program is specifically to show them the opportunities that are waiting for them as they finish up their college experience and potentially begin their careers in Maine. So those are the four that you might be connected with or heard about in different ways. Just wanted to spend a minute so that you knew a little bit about them, but they really all connect to how educators and business leaders and nonprofits can work together to support the people of Maine. In addition to that, we also do some policy and advocacy work. So we oftentimes look at what policies could be supported in Augusta that would help promote career readiness, high quality education system, et cetera. So there's a little bit of a landscape about Educate Maine. Happy to entertain questions about our organization later, but the rest of the presentation is going to focus on our connection with Maine Spark. So Maine Spark is the state's educational attainment coalition. And really where it came about is that a couple of years ago, back in sort of 2015, 2016, a group of organizations were having a lot of conversations about our lack of skilled workers in the state. We were hearing from a lot of employers, a lot of complaints about we don't have enough people for our open jobs. We don't have enough skilled people for our open jobs. And there's a mismatch in the skills that they need to be successful. We also were seeing some silos across the education and workforce systems where people were kind of focusing on their own programs and their own work, but not necessarily completely working together, which caused a little bit of concern for us as well. We also saw that the average wage for Mainers was not as high as I think we all would have wanted, even just a few years ago. And really we know that supporting families and individuals to have economic success also includes working together to increase their wages, and so that they can sustain their families and be able to be successful. And then the other piece that we saw was just this projection that if we didn't do anything collectively, that we'd really only grow our workforce naturally by maybe 1% a year, which wasn't enough to fill the open jobs that are being projected for Maine, and certainly wasn't enough to attract more employers to our state. And we didn't want to keep hearing, to be candid, that there aren't enough workers for the open jobs that we have. That's a frustrating comment, I think, that we talk about constantly, and that's a reality, but we wanted to get together and figure out how we could work collectively to help solve that challenge. So a group of organizations got together and started Maine Spark. And really what Maine Spark is a 10-year commitment from many of Maine's institutions, employers, nonprofits, and others, all focused on how do we increase the educational attainment of Maine people so that all of them have the skills needed to match the open jobs that are available across the 16 counties. So when I say the word coalition, what that means is Maine Spark is not an organization. It's not, it's run by a group of organizations that are collectively all focused on that same goal, which is that 60% of Maine people will hold education and workforce credentials that position Maine and its families for success. So really what that means is we're trying to get more adults to have short-term credentials, certifications, finish their degrees so that they can match the open opportunities that are projected for Maine just a few years down the road, down in 2025. And what our process has been is our goal is not to change the way that organizations do their work, but instead align great organizations across the state to be able to work together when it makes sense to support this overall goal. So, for example, obviously I lead Educate Maine, and we do work across the educational sequence. And what we do is we align our work with this overall goal, as does other organizations like the Finance Authority of Maine, the State Chamber of Commerce. We all sort of collectively align where we fit into this particular goal, so that instead we're all working in one direction as opposed to working kind of in separate directions and separate priorities specifically. So it's sort of a collective impact work that we're all focused on. And again, I just want to be clear, we're not focused on education for education's sake. We don't want everybody to go to a four-year college. What we want is for them to have the training so that they can get a middle wage job and be able to advance here in Maine specifically. And that could be a couple of courses, that could be finishing a degree, that could be taking a certification test. It looks different for every individual. So I just want to be really emphasize that point specifically. So this slide's just to sort of explain what a credential of value is. So I keep saying 60% of people in Maine will have a degree or credential of value. So a credential of value just simply means it could be a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a certificate that might take a year to do, or maybe even a little bit less. A certification test, like for welding, for example, you oftentimes need to sit for a test to get your welding certification. That would be included with a credential of value, as well as industry-led short-term training. So you don't necessarily have to go to an educational institution to get additional training. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot more training actually happen through kind of trade associations, directly through employers, that employers are saying, I'll train you for these jobs within my own company without requiring them to go back to a 4-year degree specifically. So I share this slide to show that there's, again, a whole variety of ways, and each one of these does line up differently kind of for each profession, as you might imagine. Some of the trades, for example, are more oriented around short-term training and certification. Some more of the liberal arts sort of areas and majors are more oriented around 4-year degrees and 2-year degrees specifically, but just know that all of it is fine. In general, what we're looking for is sending the message to Maine people and Maine students specifically that education doesn't stop at high school, that you need to have a plan beyond high school for short-term or long-term training that aligns with your aspirations. That we've got to keep moving folks, that nowadays the way that workforce sort of projections are, as you've seen from your previous speakers, many of them do require some technical training beyond the high school environment, or beyond what high schools alone can offer. So I mentioned that this was a coalition of organizations kind of all focused together. So we have, this slide represents some of the founding nonprofits and agencies and organizations that kind of founded Maine Spark. And you'll see Educate Maine, the State Chamber of Commerce, the University of Maine System, the Community College System, the Finance Authority of Maine, and Maine Development Foundation. All of those are statewide organizations that are focused on education and workforce in different ways. And then also, in addition to that, Live and Work in Maine and the Alphonse Scholarship Foundation have also come on board as leaders with this work. Even though those were the people that founded the work, those are the people that are looking at this work statewide, and this work can't happen without local initiatives, local organizations that are actually working with learners and with workers in everyday Maine towns. So despite there being a group of people focused on all 16 counties, the real work in terms of this and the real kind of moving of the needle happens in communities that actually touch direct individuals that need to finish their degrees, finish some additional training, or get connected with some training where they may change their degrees. So as I talk about 100 organizations being a part of this, that's why the list is so long, because we know what works in Washington County might not work in Knox County, which might not work in Cumberland County when it comes to connecting people with good quality training as well as good quality jobs as well. So this is just to show you kind of some different layers, and that regardless of the organization, they belong in Maine Spark as long as they support the goal. And hopefully the goal is not too controversial, which is supporting 60% of Maine adults with a degree or credential beyond high school. It's not the most controversial, if you will, in general, but very focused on the training aspect in general. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how this work is actually done. So it's great that there's this coalition, right, focused on this goal, but how does the actual work happen where we're able to make progress across the state and in communities like yours? What we've done with Maine Spark is take both a short-term view and a long-term view of how to get more adults training in our state that matches jobs in their communities. So as you can see, we really go kind of birth through retirement and workforce attraction. So we have a group of people that are making sure that birth through grade 6 students have high quality childcare. They start, kindergarten and pre-K, successfully with the skills that they need and the supports that they need. And then they are advancing through elementary school successfully in terms of reading, math, and the variety of content areas. And then what we do is we have a future success group, and that's an area that I work on closely. It's really looking at middle school age students all the way up through kind of age 25. So looking at middle school, high school, and then sort of that time kind of right after they finish high school, whether that's community college, 4-year, directly to work, or the armed services. So we've got a group of organizations all focused on that work. Then we have a group focused on adults. As you might imagine, the population that's hardest to get into training and to get into 4-year degrees is folks that have started and not finished their degrees or training or credentials. So that adult promise group is particularly important in order to get them connected and be part of that 60%. And then we have one other group called New Opportunities, which is really focused on workforce attraction and really making Maine be a welcoming place for people to move to, whether that is from another state, another country, or helping folks understand that maybe they could return to the workforce after they've retired to fill some of these workforce needs specifically. So you can see this is kind of a complicated system, but it really is just following folks from birth through retirement, knowing that we need to do work in each one of these areas in order for them to be successful. So in addition to the tracks, hopefully you don't hear it too badly, but there's a leaf blower near my computer here outside. There's a couple of different work groups that are also focused on this work, and this is a place where your organizations, your volunteers could also be connected to our work. We've got a group focused on communications, which is about building websites and earned media like a newspaper to kind of tell people about how they could connect with these opportunities for additional training in Maine. We've got a group focused on policy in our work in Augusta to make sure that the policies that we put in place and that are advocating for actually support adults getting connected with jobs and getting connected with training, and that they don't have to take on huge amount of debt to be able to take on those opportunities, but instead focus on what are the free programs and free supports that people just need to hear about and get connected to, as opposed to spend any of their hard-earned money to do. And then we've got a group that's really focused on the data and tells us, what strategies are working well and which ones aren't working so well when we think about getting more people trained in the state of Maine. So is one county doing better than another? Are more high school students in one region graduating high school and going on to credentialing more than others? That group really pays attention to the data specifically. Luckily, the leaf blower has left, so rest should be okay. In terms of policy priorities, I'm sure you've heard about, we just finished election week, so I won't talk too much in detail about policy. I think we probably want a little bit of break from this, but these are some areas that Maine Spark as a coalition works really closely with our organizations to advocate for. Those include things that might be barriers to adults getting training, as well as barriers for young people to get connected with credentialing. So that's everything from broadband to increased financial aid to support from the schools. Ones that you might not obviously think of, but I'll mention, we hear a lot from adult learners that childcare is oftentimes the number one barrier to them continuing with their degrees or returning for their degrees or training. So having a robust childcare system that folks can afford with enough slots is really key to having more adults get connected with training. And then another area which I think could be really connected to the work that you folks do in your region is really looking at Maine as a place to move to build your career, to remote work, to really kind of, now that we've had COVID, I think more people in Maine are seeing the quality of life in our state be something really, really important that we need to market more nationally, so that more folks can not just have their second homes here, but actually move their families here and participate in the workforce specifically. To be able to come into some of these small towns and really bring some entrepreneurship and much needed workers for areas that are struggling to get workers specifically. So again, a couple of policy priorities. I'll say that these areas I couldn't do on my own at Educate Maine. So one of the goals and what works well with the coalition is that our broad coalition of 100 organizations works together on policy priorities. And as you might imagine, we have much more impact collectively than we do individually. And policy is an area that it's worked really well to support moving forward. So I'd love to tie it briefly into the data, because your other speakers over the last couple of months have presented some really good data. So this slide shows our progression here in our state. So this tracks educational attainment for adults. So really looking at age 25 and up. And you'll see back in 2018 that we had 36.8% of Maine adults with a degree or credential of value. Since 2008, so we've increased that educational attainment by 13.7 points. So we're up to 50.5% right now. This data is always a year behind, as you might imagine, right? So this is released at the end of 2019 for 2018 data specifically. So you can see we're at 50.5% as a state, and we're trying to get to 60% in the next 5 years specifically. So the good news is Maine is actually one of the states that has moved the fastest in this area over the last 10-year period, which is really nice to see. I don't know if everyone always thinks that Maine would be a state that excels in this particular short-term training and degree area, but nationally, when you compare us to the other 49 states, we had very significant growth. We were in the top, I think, 6 nationally in this particular area, which shows the value of, I think Maine accepted the value of short-term credentials and certification a lot faster than of some other states across the country, and have really, with the help of the Maine community college system and other providers, really made the most of those opportunities regionally. So as you might imagine, I need this line for our coalition to keep increasing through 2025 to have us get to 60% in the next 5 years. The other piece I wanted to bring your attention to is the race data specifically, to look how learners of all races and ethnicities here in Maine compare by group to the national average. And you can see the Maine data is on the bottom, and you can see the line is our average. And you can see that American Indian people, as well as African American people, are not achieving at the same rate for credentials of attainment as Hispanic, white, or Asian American people here in Maine specifically. So this is an area that we pay close attention to, because we want to make sure that the strategies and practices that we support through Maine Spark are working for all races, and people of all genders, and all places of where they live in terms of their demographics. So I just wanted to point this out specifically, because you can see our gap is not as wide as it is nationally, which is the line above, based on race, but there's certainly still a gap based on race here in Maine that we need to keep paying attention to in general. So if we look more locally at some of the counties represented potentially on this call, you can see adult credential attainment based on the Lumina data is in basically the high 30s across the counties. So our goal as a coalition is to think about how we might be able to work with some of the mid-coast counties and increase these percentages over the next 5 years, so that folks can continue to get short-term training as well as finish their degrees specifically. So a couple of concerns that we have as a coalition, I'm sure you folks have talked about these concerns throughout the pandemic, is some folks say, well, we can't get there by 2025. We're in the middle of a pandemic, the economy is terrible, and we need to kind of change our goal. And we don't want to change our goal, because we actually think it's more important now that folks get short-term training and skills so that they can progress even further with their wages moving ahead, as opposed to not. So some of these concerns we're trying to prevent moving forward, which is the economic realities, some of the we're learning challenges around broadband, and then some of the uncertainty about what the world's going to bring over the next year. So as you might imagine and might experience with your own children or your colleagues or parents, et cetera, with so much uncertainty in the world, there are folks that don't want to decide yet whether to go back to school or go to college or take a short-term training class, because they're just not sure what the next year is going to bring. And you might have heard this from others that are working at the high schools or working in the community colleges, that there's some concerning data about just uncertainty. So it's leaving people to not fill out their FAFSA forms for college, or really make plans until they have a better understanding of what Maine's going to look like in the next year post COVID-19. So despite these challenges, we're staying focused, but we're trying to make sure that we as a coalition can support policies, practices, and funding to address these challenges, so that adults can continue to get short-term training over time. You might be surprised that during the pandemic and right after the pandemic, there should be even more opportunity for free training dollars to support these programs through the Maine Community College system, and some of their grants that they have, as well as some of the things coming out of the federal area. Basically, they're trying to help states get more trained workers, and obviously help people get off unemployment and get connected with the workforce. So despite COVID-19, I think there'll be more resources in this area moving forward to help adults as well as young people continue on with school. So I wanted to dive in. We've just got a couple more minutes before we go into discussion and questions, but a couple of local examples and local efforts, just to take kind of this big picture down to something smaller. So I talked about how I'm pretty involved with Future Success, which is that middle school through kind of college aged group here in our state. And I talked about how we believe every student needs training after high school. What we're seeing in terms of growth area and in our state and specifically in your region is we've got to keep supporting our CTE programs across the region, because the CTE programs are ones that are making sure that high school students have credentials, apprenticeships, short-term training, dual enrollment even before they leave high school, is that their percentage of placement compared to a traditional high school is typically much higher in most regions. So we want to support that. So, I know that you folks work with the Midcoast School of Technology as well as a few others in your region, but we've got to make sure that young people see that CTE is very connected to both short-term aspirations in terms of training as well as long-term, is that you can really do both. So our coalition works closely, especially around healthcare, especially around the trades and technology, which are really areas in Maine as well as your region that are really growing and have a lot of open jobs currently, and will have more over time. So I'll give you an example, and some of you on the call might already be connected to this, but that idea that employers are connecting directly with CTE centers around things like training CNAs, so that students can get their CNA certification while in high school, continue after high school to work for an employer. That employer continues to help them continue with training and actually go into nursing or pre-nursing programs successfully. So when the system works well, it's one that supports the learner, but also supports and pays close attention to any student debt, but also matches that learner with more training and employment specifically. So a lot of the work we do with Maine Spark is connecting educational institutions and employers to develop these types of initiatives. Another example is around the adult learner piece specifically, which is that Maine Spark has 373 navigators that work with people across the state who want to go back to school, whether it be for a course or a degree. You can go to mainspark.me, get started, and any adult can fill out a quick form and then be matched with a navigator in your region who will give them career counseling advice and match them with training in their particular program, as well as connect them with opportunities like New Ventures Maine, Maine Educational Opportunities Center, et cetera, or connect them with employer-led training like in these healthcare institutions, Penn Bay and others, where they could work, get training all at the same time, as opposed to only do a 4-year degree route. So we've got maybe 2 or 3 more minutes and then we'll do discussion and questions. This is a slide that I put together, really connecting education and economic development, because not everybody connects the two together. How we view it is that by supporting individuals and families and growing their wages and their employability, that's contributing to the local community, because that family is able to increase their wages, put more dollars into the community, and be able to sustain a life that's even easier than if they had lower wages. The other thing that Maine Spark does a lot of is support employers specifically, so help them take advantage of these free programs like through Maine Quality Centers and others to get training to upskill their workers. And then the third area is attracting new employers to the region, kind of changing the image of Maine as a career destination, so that we're working with individuals and families, we're working with local employers, but we're also making the regions of Maine more attractive for new employers to come. And each one of those 3 supports economic development, both locally as well as statewide specifically. So I wanted to leave you with 2 slides before we talk about question and answers, because what I was asked to do was to help your club begin to think about what could happen with the Camden Rotary and how you might connect economic development in Maine Spark. Because like I said, anybody can get connected both individually as a volunteer or as an employer or as a group or an institution. So these are some options that you might think about. You could come up with a local goal to increase educational attainment in your region, and track that goal over time would be one that would connect to the overall work. But again, localize the effort. You could focus on one of the areas that, like helping more people graduate high school, or helping them grow their aspirations, or helping with the workforce attraction efforts. Those are all kind of in the realm of the work we do with Maine Spark specifically. you could also sign the resolution, which simply says, we support this goal. We think it's great for Maine. We think it's great for our community, because the more people who support the goal as clubs, as employers, as individuals, the more we can say, look, this is a collective impact organization, and we've got the support both of statewide as well as local organizations. And here are a few other options. Again, just putting a few on the table to get people thinking about it. You can spread the word about Maine Spark. If you have an adult in your household that would like some more training, or like to connect it to apprenticeships or other kind of employer-led initiatives, they can fill out the form on Maine Spark's website, and we'll reach out to them and get them connected. We're agnostic in terms of, we work with every educational provider. We're not loyal to one or another, but instead we're loyal to the individual. You could partner locally with your educational institutions. You know, we've talked about Midcoast School of Technology, the area districts, but there could be a goal that the Rotary works on closely with some of the educational institutions locally, and do it collectively. And then certainly other things might be including partnering with tourism partners to bring more workers to your region, to potentially help fund a scholarship for either local students, if you don't already, or adult students. Oftentimes getting aid to adults is harder than traditionally aged high school students, because there's less scholarship programs geared at people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s returning to school specifically than there might be for 17, 18-year-olds looking for college for the first time. So some things to think about. I'll put my contact information as the next slide, and I think we might have maybe 5 minutes or so for questions as a full group, and then I'm happy to stay on after the closing announcements if folks want to talk more specifically. So just appreciate you being a captive audience virtually.
Jason, thank you very much. And I do know we have some questions out there, so I'm going to turn it over to Richard Anderson and Matt Brown, who will field those questions.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Am I unmuted? You hear me, Chris?
You're okay. Go
Okay,
ahead.
all right. So we have 7 questions so far, and the first is from Joan Fopp, and the question is, can you identify emerging job opportunities in our part of Maine, so the mid-coast, Knox Waldo County?
Sure. So the ones that we talk about most in your region are certainly in the healthcare space for both young people and adults. The number of job openings at Penn Bay and related healthcare facilities is very high, both with kind of low-skilled occupations, so entry level, as well as mid-level. Certainly among the trades, there's plenty of job opportunities for folks that are interested in the trades in your region, and those will continue to grow moving forward. So sort of machine technology, construction, electrical, those types of important areas. One that we've been also focused closely on is the growth of aquaculture and related kind of marine trades in your region. The projections there are pretty high, and there's also some really good statewide efforts that are growing, basically putting funding in that area to grow even more opportunities for employers to grow in general.
Okay, and let's come back for a second. You went into some detail with the trade when you said the machine, technical, electrical, but we're in the healthcare. You said entry and middle. We're more specifically in healthcare.
Sure. So what we're seeing with folks right out of high school, obviously, is we're seeing a huge need for CNAs. CNAs themselves are not necessarily high wage occupations. So we're really working on CNAs that then can start their kind of career trajectory into nursing specifically, or kind of more advanced healthcare, rather than kind of stopping and staying as CNAs throughout. We're also seeing patient service reps specifically, which is sort of an occupation that it sort of bridges between kind of some things that need to happen within healthcare in terms of like record keeping and office work, but as well as kind of patient care specifically. So patient service reps are another area that again is very accessible. They're called kind of different titles, if you will, but have a lot of openings. And then certainly the private healthcare offices and nursing homes also have quite a few opportunities in that region. And the statewide and local projection for healthcare is just, it's growing fast.
Okay, great.
So
Thank
I
you.
don't see that industry struggling in Maine.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Jason. This question comes from Barry Timms. Does Maine have a tax break for businesses to encourage new companies to come to Maine?
There's a couple of different tax kind of break options. It's not necessarily my specialty in terms of all the details, but there are a few that we've talked about with Maine Spark on both the employer side in terms of some of the seed funding that is through the Department of Economic and Community Development. There's been a lot of conversation about that with the Economic Recovery Committee, which is putting out their report from the governor's office in the next couple of weeks. So my guess is there'll be even more programs that are being launched in that particular area. There's also some on the employee side. So both that are private and public, so that the opportunity tax credit is one to try to convince more people to start their careers in Maine. So basically student tax debt relief. And then obviously the Alphon Scholars Program, which is a private program, but is trying to convince more STEM grads to choose Maine specifically. So there's some on the employee individual side, and then some that are more through the Department of Economic and Community Development and the Finance Authority of Maine. So I don't know all the details on the employer side, but there's a couple. I wish we had a few more to be candid.
Thank you.
Okay, Jason, and from Jim Bowditch, how do we compare in regards to vocational attainment and matching training attainment versus other New England states, northern New England states?
Yeah. We certainly have robust support for career technical education, in terms of CTE. Our enrollment numbers are certainly not as high as a lot of our other states here in New England. Massachusetts has a much higher percentage of their students in CTE and vocational oriented programs specifically. So we still have some work to do regarding, I think we still have to send the message that going to CTE can set you up for a variety of training options beyond high school. There's still a myth that if you go to a CTE program in Maine, that you cannot go to a four-year college. And we just all know that that's not the case, that there's wonderful people that start with vocational and then continue into a four-year program and are very successful and oftentimes have less debt than folks that don't go to career technical in their high school. So we're a bit lower. We're on par with Vermont, but we're certainly lower than Massachusetts in general. And part of that is just the regional nature of the variety of CTEs, sort of the bus time that young people have to take from their sending school to get to the closest CTE center. Whereas Massachusetts put more funding into CTE directly at so many high schools right within the same building. We have a few like that in Maine, but not enough.
Great. Jason, I think we're going to pause right now. You said you're able to stay after to field a few more questions.
Yeah, I can stay on. Yeah, that's fine.
Excellent. So
sort of the new version of the GED as well as a traditional high school diploma. And they really support locally folks, regardless of age, finishing those high school diplomas or taking the test to get the GED. So that would be my first stop. They are essential in order to help folks get into community college or into institutions after the high school diploma is completed. So local adult ed.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Jason. And then we have from Stacy Kiefer, does the 60% goal take the rate of retirement into consideration? If a large percentage of our workforce is nearing retirement, what will the gap to reach 60% potentially look like in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so the goal does include kind of expected retirements based on projections from the Department of Labor. So if folks retire at a slower or faster rate, it will affect us getting to our 60% by 2025 goal. So we do have a work group that's focused on really helping folks understand the opportunities available to them to either stay in the workforce a little bit longer or to kind of technically retire and then come back to fill in a workforce need. Because we really need everybody in the workforce. So that includes folks, kind of convincing folks to do an extra year or to return it with a different occupation in order to get to that 60%. So it is factored in, but for some reason, if the world changes and lots of folks retire or lots of people stay in, that will have to change our strategy based on the data in the next 5 years.
Got it.
And then Matt, go ahead.
Well, this one comes from you, Richard, but I'll ask it because I'm next in line. What policy, we haven't talked too much today about it, but it certainly keeps coming up. What policy is needed to expand broadband? Are there actions a community, a county can do without policy to expand broadband access?
There certainly is. I mean, obviously you're seeing schools kind of go through the Herculean effort of making sure all their students have devices, and oftentimes kind of using like MiFi or hotspots, if you will, to kind of plug the hole, if you will. We know that those don't work in all parts of Maine. I think my first advice is to make sure that you do have a community kind of driven broadband plan, because without that plan in your town, you're not able to access the amount of, the funding easily from the state. So typically the funding from the state goes first to communities that are unserved or underserved in terms of broadband, but it goes to folks that have a comprehensive plan that includes kind of local efforts, industry efforts, and kind of state and federal investment. So it really makes sure to get connected with your local efforts within your town first, because that will help you access more funding. The bond this summer was approved for initial grants, and I'm sure the Economic Recovery Committee is including more broadband dollars in their recommendations that'll come out later this month. So that's where I would start, is making sure you have an organized group of people locally that have mapped out what you need in your community, so that way you can be first in line for dollars moving forward. And to be honest, there are other grant opportunities separate from public dollars to support those efforts, directly from the federal government or from private sources. Even if it's 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand here, that adds up locally when we're talking about individual households. So.
Okay, so it's just a money matter. Worse, you have to just go to the state and national for money, basically, is what you're saying.
Well, it's either money or it's innovation, right? So the other time, thinking about what could we do that's not broadband, with satellite technology and these other technologies. So either one or the other has to advance, either the funding for broadband or the technology to help out Maine communities, without laying wire, under the ground, basically, but instead using satellites up in the sky.
Okay, good, thanks. I had one other question, but if any others have questions now, get them in here. This is just going back to one of your first comments, and where you talked, there's a line in there about higher wages. And so are you saying that the employers have to begin paying more to attract the people to get the new training, or and if that is the case, why is demand driving higher wages if that's the case?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not advocating for, especially in the pandemic, for Maine's smallest employers to suddenly increase wages specifically. So what I'm advocating for is folks to think about. I'm looking at it more from an individual perspective of, either a person can start off with a job that only requires a high school education, but might have a low wage, or they can look at a kind of a career ladder where their skills and experience will develop over time and their wages will develop over time. Certainly Maine employers, if they can't find people, oftentimes they will increase their wages to try to find people, but we know the economics of that can only work to a certain point, or can only work in the short term, so I think demand does have to drive higher wages. But I need to make sure, from our perspective, from Maine Spark's perspective, that Maine employers have skilled people that they can hire in their local communities. And what we hear from folks is there's oftentimes a skill mismatch, that even though they're offering good wages, they can't find anybody with the skills that they need for those wages. And that's when Maine individuals and families lose out, you know, and have to stay in occupations that might not pay them as well. You know, for example, being a CNA for 20 years, which is a great occupation, but on average, it doesn't pay very well. But instead, taking those CNAs, working with the employer, and then moving them up the career and training ladder so that with that, their wages can increase specifically, but doing it in a way that's kind of stepping stones instead of all at the same time, which we know economically just doesn't work for the majority of small Maine employers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it, Matt.
Yeah, I agree. There's one from Jonathan, but it looks like you got it answered. Is that right, Jonathan?
I typed that before he started addressing all the local things. So I thought Jason covered that very well.
We're all set then.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'll say, the caveat is the statewide average is based on number of people as opposed to geography. So just know that, for example, there are so many people in Cumberland County. If we look at the whole state and their credential average is higher, that moves the state average. So yeah, so I just want you to, I'm sure you understand that. It's not that all 16 counties kind of average together by their county average. It's more all of the individuals that are adults 25 through retirement is what the average is based on. So you folks could move up your percentage locally pretty quickly, to be honest, based on the population of your counties, more so than some of the more populated counties specifically. So.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank you.
Chris,
I wanted to
Joan?
thank you very much on behalf of the Camden Rotary Club for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us about Maine Sparks. It's fascinating, and we appreciate the work that you're doing. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and I'm happy. If folks have questions, feel free to email me, or if you want to talk more about what the Rotary can do at a future point after you get done the series and there's some connection, just feel free to reach out. So enjoy the afternoon with you folks. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jason. Thank you.
With
Thanks.
that,
Thank you very much.
Camden Rotary is dismissed. Thank you very much.